What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be talking about some potential busts that you should avoid drafting in your 2024 fantasy football draft. More specifically, players that I deem as busts because they are either too high in value in ADP or they possess a lot of risk that I just want to avoid in those drafts. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about my first bust. So the first player that I want to talk about in today's video is going to be Sam LaPorta of the Detroit Lions. And Sam LaPorta had a historic rookie season. I get it, but drafting him as the first tight end off the board in the second round of fantasy football drafts, it's just a bit too bold for my liking. And sure, he was amazing last year, but there's a real chance that he could see some touchdown regression in his year too. And the historic data backs this up as well. Tight ends who score 10 or more touchdowns but fail to hit 900 receiving yards often see a dip in touchdowns the following year. And if that happens with LaPorta, anybody who drafts him early could be left feeling like they reached too high on him, especially with so many of the other top tier running backs and wide receivers available in that range. And to make it worth drafting him so high, LaPorta would have to repeat last year's performance and potentially even take a step forward. Now that's asking a lot of him, especially when you can find other tight ends like Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid, who are all going a few rounds later, who offer the similar upside without the steep price tag. So while LaPorta is a beast and I love Sam LaPorta as a talent, there are better values at the tight end position that don't offer the risk that Sam LaPorta does, meaning that I'm likely going to be avoiding him this early in my draft. Now the second player that I want to avoid is going to be Josh Jacobs for the Green Bay Packers, and this Green Bay offense is looking really good this year. Jordan Love, he stepped up in the back half of last season, and Matt LaFleur has been doing a great job with the play calling over his time with the Packers. So there's definitely a path where things work out well for Josh Jacobs, but the thing is Jacobs is going super early in drafts and there's a lot of downside to consider as well. Right now I've got Jacobs ranked as my RB15 with a late 4th round ADP, but he's being drafted as the RB11 in the early 3rd round, which is a pretty big gap in projections. And Jacobs has had some solid years with the Raiders, especially from 2020 to 2022, where he was putting up RB1 numbers, even finishing as the RB3 overall in 2022. But last season his efficiency really took a nosedive. He hit career lows in yards per carry, yards after contacts per attempt, and fantasy points per opportunity, and no one's expecting him to repeat that RB3 finish from 2 seasons ago, but there are some red flags that suggest Jacobs might not be the same runner heading into his 6th year in the league. Now he finished as a top 24 running back in just 61.5% of his games last year, and he cracked the top 12 in only 38.5% of his games, and that's similar to guys like Najee Harris, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, and Joe Mixon, all of whom are going rounds later than Jacobs is in drafts. Plus the Packers have the 4th toughest opening schedule for running backs this season, and Jacobs is in one of the most crowded backfields he's ever been in, with Marshawn Lloyd and AJ Dillon also competing for touches. So there's a chance that Josh Jacobs could still have a good season, but he's going to have to get back to that 12 or 14 touchdown type of range in order to pay off at his draft cost. But with all of these question marks surrounding him, I'd rather just take a shot on a Rachaad White, James Cook, Joe Mixon type of running back that are all going a round or 2 later than Josh Jacobs, or just take a shot on one of the elite wide receivers in this round instead. Now the next player that I think is probably not going to pay off at his current ADP is going to be Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. And Zay Flowers is getting a lot of hype this year. He has the highest ADP for a Ravens wide receiver in the Lamar Jackson era, and he had a solid rookie season averaging 6.8 targets per game, which was promising, and that explains why he's being drafted so highly. But there are some concerns with Zay Flowers. He only finished as a top 24 wide receiver in 37.5% of his games last year, and he was a top 12 receiver in just 18.8% of his games. And what's really telling is that 5 of the 6 games where he finished as a top 24 receiver happened when Mark Andrews was not in the lineup. In fact, Flowers was only a wide receiver 2 for your fantasy football team once all season when Andrews was healthy. That's not great, especially when you're considering drafting him in the early 5th round. Now, a big reason for that is over 60% of his targets were within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage, which means low average depth of target is limiting his upside. And if that wasn't enough, the Ravens also have the 3rd toughest opening schedule for wide receivers this season. So for Flowers to live up to his draft price, he's going to have to prove that he can be a real threat even when Andrews is on the football field. Plus, with the additions of Derrick Henry, we could see the Ravens leaning a little bit more into the running game, which would mean a little bit less targets for a guy like Zay Flowers. So while he's got potential, there are definitely some red flags to be wary of when you're using such a high draft cost on him in your draft. Now, the next player I want to talk about is going to be Odunze, the rookie wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. And don't get me wrong, Odunze has a lot of potential and should be a great pro down the line, but we might need to dial back our expectations for him as a rookie. With elite target target earners like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen on the roster, Odunze might not make a huge impact early on in the season. Now that said, he's definitely a talented player, and rookie wide receivers can sometimes shine later in the year. However, the Bears, they have brought in Shane Waldron, who previously worked with Jackson Smith and Jigba in a crowded wide receiver room there in Seattle, and it's easy to draw parallels between that situation and the one Odunze is stepping in here with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. Now, Odunze is coming off the board around that 6-7 turn in drafts, which does seem a little bit high to me, but if either DJ Moore or Keenan Allen were to get injured, Odunze, he could definitely step up and take on a bigger role, but in this draft range, you're passing up on some solid players who are guaranteed more playing time and targets like Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, Jordan Addison, and Jaden Reed. And more importantly, something I've talked about in this range, you're also going to be missing out on the opportunity to draft an elite quarterback like Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, who I think are all much better picks in this range. So while Odunze has the upside, and while he has a bright future here with the Chicago Bears, I think there's just better picks to make here in year one for Rome Odunze rather than drafting him to your fantasy football team. Now, the next guy we'll talk about is Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Chris Godwin, he's been trending downward in fantasy over the past 3 seasons. His fantasy points per game, success rate, and touchdown numbers have all dropped year after year. And looking at his recent stats, Godwin has only finished as a wide receiver 1 in about 20% of his games over the last 3 years, and as a wide receiver 2 in 37% of those games. And looking at last season, it was even worse than that. He was a wide receiver 1 in just 12% of his games, and a wide receiver 2 in 24%. Now that's worse than some lesser known names like Noah Brown and Demarcus Robinson. So at 28 years old, he's not exactly at the end of his career, but it's fair to question his upside at this point. He could still be a decent wide receiver 3 for your team, but I'd rather take the chance on players with more potential in the middle rounds like Jaden Reed, Jordan Addison, Calvin Ridley, Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Deontay Johnson, because I think all of these guys offer higher ceilings while having similar floors to Chris Godwin. Now, there's talk that Chris Godwin could move back into the slot, but even with that change, I'm still not convinced that he still has a high enough ceiling, especially when you consider the better options that are available in this round near his ADP. And now the last and final player we'll talk about today is going to be another rookie. It'll be Jonathon Brooks of the Carolina Panthers. And Jonathon Brooks, he was the first running back taken in the NFL draft, and there's a lot of buzz around him right now. He's got that dual threat ability, he can make big plays, but there are some injury concerns with him going into the 2024 season. Now, he suffered an ACL tear last November, and the Panthers head coach Dave Canales has mentioned that Brooks probably won't be close to ready to go until about week 3 or week 4 of the NFL season. Now, in the meantime, I expect Chuba Hubbard to handle the bulk of the early season workload, and Canales has been praising Hubbard, and with Miles Sanders still in the mix after a disappointing year, it looks like Brooks might be on the sideline for a while. While Brooks has potential and could be a solid pickup in the second half of the season, especially in Canales' run-heavy scheme, I'm not really keen on drafting him right now. There's a chance he might not be playable in the first half of the year, and there are other players in this draft range that can offer more immediate value and similar season-long potential. So unless you're willing to wait and stash him, there are probably better options at his current ADP. So there you have it. There's a few players that I think are overvalued or being drafted too highly or just riskier picks in your fantasy football draft. So if you did enjoy this video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you never miss any of our future uploads. Lots of content coming your way. Hoping to help you guys win your fantasy football championships this year. And also make sure you go join that Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description. It will be down there. Like I said, free to join. I'm in there helping you guys with your fantasy football drafts all year long. So with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you today. I will see you on our next video. But until then, peace out.